The sword came at Devin Northwood's throat before the client even introduced herself. He twisted sideways, letting the practice blade hiss past his ear, and caught the wrist behind it with both hands. The weight behind the strike told him everything he needed to know about the woman testing him. She was strong, focused, and utterly serious about finding out whether he could keep her alive. He redirected her momentum rather than fighting it, spinning her attack into empty air while staying close enough that she could not recover for a second attempt. When he released her wrist and stepped back, creating the proper distance for conversation rather than combat, she was already lowering the wooden sword with a slight nod of approval. "You will do," said Renna Northway, and the afternoon sun streaming through the training yard made her green skin seem to glow with its own light. Her tusks were small and elegant, curving just slightly over her lower lip, and her dark hair hung in a thick braid over one shoulder. She wore traveling clothes, sturdy leather and practical cotton, and moved with the grace of someone who had trained for combat since childhood. Devin recognized a warrior when he saw one, which made the entire situation more puzzling. Why would someone who clearly knew how to handle herself need a bodyguard? He did not ask. 7 years as a mercenary had taught him that clients explained what they wanted you to know, and prying into the rest was a good way to lose coin or trust or both. "The pay is 50 silver per week, plus room and board," Renna said, setting the practice sword on a rack with care that suggested respect for weapons even in their dulled forms. "The contract lasts until winter, possibly longer if circumstances warrant. You will accompany me on a journey through the border territories, guard me during negotiations with various landholders and merchants, and ensure my safety during travel." "Questions? What kind of threats are we expecting?" Devin asked. The training yard belonged to an old friend who rented space to fighters looking for work, and around them, other mercenaries drilled or sparred or sat in the shade, drinking water and comparing scars. None of them paid particular attention to the orc woman conducting a very public interview, which told Devin this was a place where such things happened often enough to be unremarkable. Human bandits, mostly. Some may object to doing business with an orc. Others will see me as an easy target traveling with only one guard. Her expression was calm, matter of fact, as though discussing the possibility of violence against her person required no more emotion than commenting on the weather. "I expect you to be competent enough to discourage most trouble before it starts, and skilled enough to end it quickly if it does." "I can do that." "I looked into your record," Renna said, and pulled a folded piece of paper from her belt pouch. She did not unfold it, merely held it as evidence that she had done her research thoroughly. 3 years with the Copper Hawks Mercenary Company, fighting border raids along the eastern marches. 2 years independent contract work, mostly caravan guard duty. No complaints from previous employers. No charges of theft, desertion, or contract breaking. 1 letter of commendation from a merchant lord whose daughter you kept safe during a rather ugly ambush. Devin said nothing. She had clearly hired investigators or paid well for information, which meant she took this seriously. Good. He preferred working for people who understood what they were buying. "You are 25 years old, unmarried, and have no outstanding debts or obligations that would compromise your loyalty during this contract," Renna continued. Her eyes, dark and sharp, studied his face as though reading something written there. "You are also one of the few human mercenaries in this town who did not refuse to meet with me when they learned I was an orc." There it was. The real test had not been the sword, it had been whether he would show up at all. "I fight for coin, not politics," Devin said. You pay fair wages for honest work, and I will give you honest service. Everything else is noise." Something in her expression shifted, a slight softening around her eyes that suggested relief or perhaps approval. She folded the paper and tucked it back into her pouch, then extended her hand in the human fashion. Her grip was firm and warm when he shook it, her palm calloused from weapon work just like his own. "We leave in 3 days," Renna said. "Meet me at the northern gate 1 hour after dawn. Bring whatever gear you need for 2 months on the road. We will resupply at towns along the way, but I prefer not to depend on finding everything we need. Bring your own weapons and bedroll. I will provide the horses and provisions." "Agreed." She held his gaze for a moment longer, as though weighing something she saw there, then nodded once and turned to leave. Devin watched her go, moving through the training yard with her head high and her shoulders back, utterly unbothered by the stares that followed her. Most were merely curious, but a few held the dull hostility that some humans carried toward orcs like a sickness they refused to cure. Renna ignored them all with the ease of long practice. When she disappeared through the gate, Devin's friend Marcus wandered over from where he had been supervising a pair of young fighters drilling with quarterstaffs. "That is a lot of coin for a simple guard job," Marcus observed. He was a decade older than Devin, scarred and weathered, with the kind of casual wisdom that came from surviving longer than most in a profession that killed people young. "Makes me wonder what she is not telling you." "Every client has secrets," Devin said. "As long as the pay is real and the work is honest, I do not need to know them all." Marcus grunted, which could have meant agreement or skepticism or simply acknowledgement that Devin was old enough to make his own mistakes. "Watch yourself out there." Plenty of humans think roughing up an orc is doing the god's work, and they do not care if she hired protection. Might make it worse. Actually, some will see it as a challenge. Then they will learn better. The older mercenary laughed, a rough bark of sound, and clapped Devin on the shoulder. "That is the spirit. Come have a drink tonight. If you are riding out in 3 days, you should at least start the journey with a clear head and a proper goodbye to civilization." Devin agreed, and they spent the evening at a tavern that catered to fighters and sellswords, drinking decent ale and swapping stories about past contracts. But even as he laughed at Marcus's tale of a merchant who tried to pay in chickens instead of coin, part of his mind was already moving forward, planning what he would need for the journey and wondering what kind of woman Renna Northway truly was beneath that calm, controlled exterior. 3 days later, he arrived at the northern gate with his gear packed and his weapons sharp, and found her already waiting with 2 horses saddled and ready. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of perfect traveling weather that made you grateful to be leaving the crowded town behind for open country. Renna looked him over with the same assessing gaze she had used during their first meeting, checking his equipment with the eye of someone who knew what mattered on a long journey. "Good," she said simply, and handed him the reins to a sturdy bay gelding. "We make for Thornfield first, about 4 days' ride if the weather holds. I have business with a wool merchant there who supplies several of the northern settlements." They rode out through the gate side by side, and Devin noticed the way people moved aside to let them pass, some with mere practicality and others with expressions that suggested they were making way for something unclean. Renna gave no sign that she noticed or cared, sitting straight in her saddle with her eyes on the road ahead. The first day passed in relative silence. They kept a steady pace, eating miles without pushing the horses too hard, and stopped for a brief meal at midday in the shade of an old oak that marked the boundary between farmland and wilder country. Renna ate quickly and efficiently, the same way she seemed to do everything, and was back in the saddle before Devin had finished his bread and cheese. "You are quiet," she observed when they resumed riding. It was not quite a question, but her tone invited explanation if he chose to give one. "Listening," Devin said. The road here was empty except for them, but habit made him pay attention to the tree line and the way the birds moved. "Hard to hear trouble coming if I am busy talking." She made a sound that might have been approval. They rode on. By the time they made camp that evening in a clearing well off the road, Devin had formed a clearer picture of his employer. She was meticulous in her preparations, checking the perimeter herself even though that was supposed to be his job, and she moved through the camp tasks with practiced efficiency. She had clearly spent considerable time traveling rough. When he offered to take first watch, she agreed without argument, but also without the kind of performative gratitude some clients gave, as though acknowledging that he was doing exactly what she paid him for. "Tell me about the border territories," Devin said as they sat by the fire eating a simple dinner of dried meat and hard biscuits. "I fought there during my time with the Hawks, but that was military work. Different perspective." Renna looked up from her food, considering the question. "The borderlands are where people go when they do not fit anywhere else," she said finally. "Too far from the settled territories for nobles to care much about what happens, too close to unclaimed lands for safety. You get farmers trying to make a life from difficult soil, traders dealing in goods the cities consider too crude or too foreign, and a mix of races that would never live side by side in more civilized places." She paused, poking at the fire with a stick. "It is a hard place, but honest. People there care more about whether you can do a day's work or keep your word than what color your skin is." "Is that where you are from?" "No. I was born in the Green Hills, in an orc settlement about 2 weeks north of here. But I have been working in the borderlands for 5 years now, brokering trade agreements and connecting suppliers with buyers. There is good coin in being the person who knows who needs what and who has it to sell." She glanced at him, one eyebrow raised slightly. "Why do you ask?" "Because I guard you better if I understand the territory, and the people we will be dealing with," Devin said. Which was true, and also not the whole truth. He was curious about her, about what drove an orc woman to make her living traveling through human lands where she would face suspicion and hostility at every turn. But he did not press. If she wanted him to know more, she would tell him. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. They rode, ate, made camp, and exchanged only the words necessary for practical coordination. It was comfortable in its own way, the silence of two people who did not need to fill every moment with chatter. Devin found himself appreciating her competence, the way she handled herself and her business with quiet confidence. Thornfield turned out to be a prosperous market town built around a central square where merchants displayed their goods beneath colorful awnings. They arrived in the afternoon, and Renna led him directly to an inn called the Lamb and Wheel. The innkeeper, a stout woman with flour on her apron and a shrewd look in her eye, greeted Renna by name. "Mistress Northway, good to see you again. Your usual room, please, Hilda. And a second room for my associate." The innkeeper's gaze flicked to Devin, taking in his weapons and bearing, and she nodded without comment. Coins changed hands, and she showed them upstairs to clean, simple rooms with real beds and windows that overlooked the stable yard. "My meeting with the wool merchant is tomorrow morning," Renna said, standing in the doorway of Devin's room. "Tonight I plan to visit the public house across the square to gather information about conditions further north. You should come not as obvious security, but as a traveling companion. I find people speak more freely when they do not think they are being watched." It was the first time she had asked anything of him beyond straightforward guard duty, and Devin recognized it as a kind of test. She was seeing whether he could be subtle as well as skilled with a blade. "I can manage that." They went to the public house after cleaning off the road dust and changing into slightly less travel-worn clothes. The establishment was crowded and loud, filled with merchants and farmers and craftspeople finishing their day's business with ale and conversation. Renna found a table near the back, and they ordered drinks and food while she listened to the talk flowing around them. Devin watched her work. She had a gift for it, asking casual questions that led people to share news about bandits on the northern road, about a new tariff causing trouble for traders, about which villages had good harvests and which were struggling. She bought drinks for a few talkative souls and nodded sympathetically at their complaints, gathering information like a farmer harvesting grain. No one challenged her presence, though a few shot her sidelong looks when they thought she was not paying attention. Devin marked those individuals carefully, noting which were merely curious and which carried something uglier in their expressions. Near midnight, as the crowd thinned and they prepared to leave, a man blocked their path to the door. He was drunk, his face flushed and his stance unsteady, and he looked Renna up and down with open contempt. "We do not need your kind here," he said, loud enough that nearby conversations faltered. "Taking honest work from honest folk, probably cheating merchants with orc tricks." Devin started to move, but Renna touched his arm lightly, a signal to wait. She looked at the drunk man with an expression of such perfect calm that it made the hostility in his face seem childish by comparison. "I have taken nothing from you," she said quietly. "I buy goods at fair prices and sell them at honest profit. If you have a legitimate grievance, we can discuss it when you are sober. If you simply want to insult me because of what I am, you can do that too, but it will not make your life any better." The man blinked, her reasonable tone apparently not what he expected. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then muttered something incomprehensible and stumbled away. The public house returned to its normal noise level as though nothing had happened. "Thank you for waiting," Renna said to Devin as they stepped out into the cool night air. "You handled it. I have had practice." There was something tired in her voice, a weariness that went deeper than the late hour. Men like that exist everywhere. Getting angry at them only proves whatever they think they know about orcs being savage and violent. Better to show them something different, even if it never changes their minds. They walked back to the inn in silence, and Devin thought about what it must cost her, that constant measured response to hatred, that refusal to let other people's ugliness drag her down to their level. He had fought in battles and killed men trying to kill him, but he had never had to armor himself in patience the way she did every single day. The next morning, Renna's meeting with the wool merchant went smoothly. Devin stood outside the merchant's shop, watching the street while she negotiated inside. When she emerged an hour later, she looked satisfied. "We have an agreement," she said. "He will supply 3 of the northern settlements with winter wool at favorable terms, and I will coordinate the deliveries. Everyone profits." She smiled slightly, and it transformed her face, making her look younger and less guarded. "This is the part I love, connecting people who need each other. It is like solving a puzzle where everyone wins when you find the right fit." They spent 2 more days in Thornfield, while Renna met with other merchants and traders, building her network of contacts and agreements. Devin accompanied her to some meetings and waited outside for others, learning her rhythms and the way she worked. She was brilliant at it. He realized, reading people, understanding what they needed, finding the angles that made everyone feel they were getting a good deal. In another life, with different skin, she could have been wealthy and powerful. As it was, she carved out her success inch by careful inch, overcoming suspicion through sheer competence and persistence. On their fourth morning in Thornfield, they rode out heading northwest toward a settlement called Graymore. The road was rougher here, less traveled, and they passed through stretches of forest broken by occasional farms. Around midday, Devin spotted movement in the trees ahead too deliberate to be animals, too hidden to be innocent travelers. "Bandits," he said quietly, bringing his horse closer to Renna's. "At least 4, maybe more. They are trying to set up an ambush where the road narrows through those rocks." Renna did not question how he knew. "Options. We can turn back and find another route which costs us time and shows them we are nervous. We can charge through and hope surprise carries us past them, or we can draw them out on our terms and deal with them here, where we have room to move." She considered for only a moment. "The last option. I will not spend the next month running from every threat." Devin nodded and dismounted, making a show of checking his horses' hoof as though they had stopped for a minor problem. Renna followed his lead, also dismounting, giving the hidden watchers time to commit to their attack. Sure enough, within minutes 6 men emerged from the trees, poorly armed but mean-looking, the kind of desperate predators who haunted lonely roads looking for easy prey. Their leader, a rangy man with a scarred face, grinned when he saw Renna. "Well now, this is a surprise. An orc bitch playing at being a merchant. Wonder how much someone would pay to get you back." "No one," Renna said flatly. "I travel independently. Then I guess nobody will miss you much." The bandit leader drew a rusty sword, and his men spread out, trying to surround them. Devin moved before they could complete the circle. He had spent 7 years learning how to end fights quickly, and these were not trained fighters, just thugs who thought numbers and surprise would be enough. He broke the leader's sword arm with a quick, brutal strike, then used the screaming man as a shield while he drew his own blade and closed with the next nearest bandit. Steel rang against steel twice before Devin disarmed the man and put him on the ground with a blow from his pommel. The other 4 hesitated, suddenly realizing this was not going to be easy prey. Devin gave them a flat, cold stare. "Leave now and you live. Stay and I will kill you. Your choice takes 3 seconds." They ran, dragging their groaning companions with them, crashing through the underbrush in their hurry to escape. Devin watched until he was certain they were truly gone, then checked himself for injuries, a few bruises, nothing serious, and turned to Renna. She was staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. Not fear, but something intense and evaluating, as though she were seeing him clearly for the first time. That was. She started, then stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. "Thank you, that was well done." They remounted and continued riding, but something had shifted between them. She was quieter than usual, thoughtful, and when they made camp that evening she sat by the fire longer than necessary, staring into the flames. "I have hired guards before," Renna said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "They were adequate mostly, did their jobs without complaint, but none of them would have moved that fast to protect me. Most would have let me take at least 1 hit before deciding I was worth defending." Devin looked up from sharpening his knife. "You hired me to keep you safe. That is what I do. Because I pay you." "Yes." He did not see the point in pretending otherwise. "But also because you treated me with respect when we met, paid fair wages, and have been nothing but professional and competent since we started this journey. That earned something beyond the coin." She smiled, small and genuine, and something warm kindled in her dark eyes. "You are different from most humans I have met. You are different from most employers I have worked for." They left it at that, but the silence that followed felt different, less like 2 professionals maintaining distance, and more like 2 people beginning to know each other. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of travel and trade. They visited settlements scattered across the borderlands, each one a small collection of hardy souls trying to make lives in difficult country. Renna negotiated agreements for wool, leather, grain, and a dozen other goods, building networks of trade that would keep these isolated communities connected to larger markets. Devin watched her work with growing admiration. She was not just clever, she genuinely cared about helping these people, about making their lives a little easier through better trade terms and reliable connections. And she was teaching him, though he only realized it gradually. She explained the economics of border trading, the politics of dealing with communities that were often suspicious of outsiders, the patience required to build trust. When they camped, they talked about everything from strategy to philosophy to the small, mundane details of their lives before this journey brought them together. Devin found himself looking forward to those evening conversations more than he wanted to examine too closely. There was something about Renna that drew him: her strength, yes, but also her kindness, her sharp humor, the way she faced the world's ugliness without letting it make her ugly in return. She was beautiful, he realized one evening as firelight played across her green skin and caught in her dark hair. Not in spite of her tusks and pointed ears, but because of everything she was, the complete picture of her. He did not act on the realization. She was his employer, and he was professional enough to know better than to complicate a working relationship with feelings that might not be returned. But he caught himself watching her more often, noticing the graceful way she moved, the small expressions that crossed her face when she thought no one was looking. At a settlement called Riverside, they stayed 3 days while Renna worked out a complex agreement involving grain shipments and tool supplies. On the second evening, the settlement's elder invited them to dinner, a surprising honor that Renna accepted with evident pleasure. The meal was simple but generous, and the elder, a weathered woman named Clara, treated Renna with genuine warmth. "You have done good work here, Mistress Northway," Clara said, raising her cup in a toast. "Before you started brokering our trades, we paid twice as much for tools and got half the price for our grain. You have made real differences in people's lives." Renna ducked her head, looking almost embarrassed by the praise. "I only connect buyers and sellers. You do the real work." "Modest as well as clever," Clara said with a laugh. "Hold on to this one, young man," she added to Devin. "Women like her do not come along often." Devin met Renna's eyes across the table and saw his own complicated feelings reflected their awareness, uncertainty, something that might have been hope. He smiled and raised his own cup. "I am learning that." That night, as they prepared for bed in the small guest house the settlement provided, Renna paused in her doorway. "Devin, yes, I am glad you took this contract." Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, so different from her usual confident tone that it made his chest tighten. "I have had guards who were skilled and guards who were reliable, but I have never had someone who made me feel genuinely safe. Not just from bandits or threats, but safe to be myself. Thank you for that." Before he could find words to respond, she slipped into her room and closed the door. Devin stood in the dark hallway for a long moment, his heart beating harder than it should have been, and admitted to himself that this was no longer just a job. He was falling for her. The revelation should have troubled him more than it did. Instead, lying in his own bed staring at the ceiling, he felt something like relief. For 7 years he had lived by his sword, moving from contract to contract without attachment, building nothing that lasted beyond the immediate work. Renna made him want something different, a future that extended beyond the next fight, the next meal, the next town. She made him want to be someone worth coming home to. But wanting and having were different things, and he had no idea if she felt anything beyond professional appreciation for a job well done. He resolved to continue as he had been doing his work, being her friend if she wanted one, and keeping his deeper feelings quiet unless she gave him reason to think they might be welcome. 2 days later, everything changed. They were riding toward a town called Millbrook, following a road that wound through rolling hills dotted with sheep. It was peaceful country, the kind that made you forget there were people in the world who carried hate like a weapon. Renna was telling him about her childhood in the Green Hills, describing the orc traditions around harvest festivals, when riders appeared on the road ahead. 6 men, well armed and mounted on good horses. Not bandits, these had the look of soldiers or professional fighters. Devin's instincts screamed warning, but they were in open country with nowhere to run. "Let me do the talking," Renna said quietly, her relaxed posture vanishing into alert readiness. The riders spread across the road, blocking their path. Their leader was a hard-faced man with a captain's bearing and cold eyes that lingered on Renna with open disgust. "Renna Northway," he said, and it was not a question. "You are wanted for questioning regarding trade violations and possible smuggling. You will come with us." "Under whose authority?" Renna's voice was level, calm, but Devin saw the tension in her shoulders. "Lord Hadley of the Eastern Territories. He has concerns about your business practices and wants answers." It was a lie wrapped in official-sounding language, and they all knew it. Lord Hadley was known for his hatred of orcs, and his questions would likely be delivered with fists and worse. This was kidnapping dressed up as legal authority. "I have broken no laws," Renna said. "If Lord Hadley has questions, he can submit them through proper channels." "I do not recognize his authority in these territories." The captain smiled, thin and cruel. "You can come peacefully or we can drag you. Your choice, orc." Devin moved his horse between Renna and the soldiers, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "You are not taking her anywhere." "And who are you?" "Her pet human." The captain's smile widened. "Step aside, boy. This does not concern you. She is my employer, traveling under legitimate contract. Any attempt to detain her unlawfully makes you kidnappers, not soldiers." "I will defend her, and when I kill you, it will be legal and justified." The certainty in his voice made the captain's smile falter. These were professional fighters, yes, but Devin had spent 7 years learning how to read opponents, and he saw the calculation in the captain's eyes. 6 against 1 were good odds, but not if that one was skilled enough to take several of them down before falling. The question was whether it was worth dying to collect some lord's bounty on an orc woman. Renna's hand touched his arm, light and quick. "Devin, there are too many." "I know." He did not take his eyes off the captain. "But they will have to kill me before they touch you, and I promise to make it expensive." Something shifted in the air, a tension that could break either into violence or retreat. The captain studied Devin's face, saw whatever certainty lived there, and apparently decided this particular prize was not worth the cost. "Lord Hadley will hear about this," he said, gathering his reins. "You have made enemies today." "I will survive that." Devin's voice was flat, hard as iron. "Ride away now while you still can." They rode away, but slowly, with dark looks back that promised this was not finished. Devin watched until they disappeared over the hills, then finally allowed himself to breathe. "That was incredibly stupid," Renna said, and her voice shook slightly. "They could have killed you. They could have tried." He turned to look at her and saw something fierce and bright in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also something else. Gratitude, respect, and beneath it all, an emotion that made his breath catch. "Why?" she asked, and there was a world of meaning in that single word. Why risk your life? Why stand against 6 armed men? Why protect an orc woman you have known for only weeks? Devin could have given her a dozen practical answers, could have hidden behind professional duty or contract obligations. Instead, he told her the truth. Because somewhere along this journey, you stopped being just a client. You are someone I care about, Renna. Someone I would stand beside even without a contract, even without coin. Someone worth protecting, because losing you would hurt more than any wound those men could give me. She stared at him, her lips slightly parted, her eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like wonder. The afternoon sun made her skin glow, caught highlights in her dark hair, and Devin thought he had never seen anyone more beautiful. Devin, She stopped, seeming to struggle with words. I have spent my whole life being careful. Careful with humans, careful with trust, careful with my heart because I learned early that people will use anything against me. But you, from the first day you have been different. You see me, not what I am but who I am, and that is rarer than you know. Renna, I am falling in love with you, she said in a rush, as though the words had been building pressure behind her careful walls and finally burst free. I know it is complicated and probably foolish, and I am still your employer, so this is incredibly inappropriate, but I am tired of being careful. I am tired of pretending I do not feel what I feel. Devin closed the distance between their horses and reached for her hand. She met him halfway, her fingers lacing with his, warm and strong and trembling slightly. I am falling in love with you too, he said. Have been for weeks, probably. I just did not want to presume, she laughed, a surprised burst of sound that was half joy and half relief. We are both fools, then, dancing around each other when we could have been honest from the start. Better late than never. They sat there on the road, hands clasped between their horses, grinning at each other like idiots while the world continued around them. Eventually, practical concerns reasserted themselves. They were exposed here, and Lord Hadley's men might return with reinforcements, but for a few perfect moments. Nothing existed except the two of them and the bright, fragile thing blooming between them. They rode on to Millbrook, but now the silence was charged with awareness. Every glance felt weighted with meaning, every casual touch electric. When they took rooms at an inn that evening, Renna hesitated outside her door. I am not ready to. She started, and Devin could see her gathering courage. That is, I want to be sure this is real, not just danger and proximity making us feel things we might regret later. Can we take this slowly? As slow as you need, Devin said and meant it. I am not going anywhere. She smiled, brilliant and grateful, and kissed his cheek before disappearing into her room. Devin touched the spot where her lips had pressed against his skin and felt like a boy with his first infatuation, dizzy and hopeful and terrified of ruining something precious. Over the following weeks, they courted each other in the stolen moments between work and travel. Renna continued her trading, negotiating agreements and building her networks, while Devin kept her safe and learned to read the subtle language of her expressions. They talked for hours by campfires, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. She told him about growing up in the Green Hills, about the orc traditions she loved, and the cultural expectations she had chosen to defy by making her own way in the world. He told her about his childhood on a small farm, about choosing the mercenary life because it offered purpose and coin, about the loneliness he had not fully recognized until she filled it. Their first real kiss happened under stars beside a river, 3 weeks after their confession on the road. Renna had been washing in the shallows, and Devin had been keeping watch from the bank, carefully not looking until she emerged in clean clothes with her hair wet and loose around her shoulders. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. See something interesting? Yes, he said simply. You. She crossed to where he sat and settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. The river murmured over stones and night birds called from the trees, and the moment felt suspended somehow, apart from ordinary time. "I am ready," Renna said softly, "to take this further, to stop being so careful." Devin turned to face her, reading the certainty in her eyes, and cupped her face gently in both hands. Her skin was warm, slightly rough with the texture that was uniquely hers, and when he kissed her it felt like coming home. She made a soft sound and kissed him back, her arms coming around his neck, her tusks brushing his cheek in a sensation that was strange and perfect. They kissed for a long time, learning each other, taking the time to make it good. When they finally broke apart, Renna was smiling so wide it had to hurt. "That was worth waiting for," she said. "We can do it again if you like. I like very much." They continued their journey, but now as lovers as well as business partners. Renna still conducted her trading with the same brilliant skill. But now Devin stood beside her in negotiations as well as security, learning the intricacies of her work, and occasionally offering insights that made her laugh or nod thoughtfully. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths, covering each other's weaknesses. Not everyone approved. In a town called Ferndale, an innkeeper refused them rooms when he realized they were together, calling Devin a race traitor and Renna worse things. They left without argument and camped outside town, and that night Renna was quieter than usual. "Does it bother you?" she asked as they lay in their bedrolls beneath the stars. "The things people say, the way they look at us." Devin considered the question seriously. "It bothers me that people can be cruel for no good reason. It bothers me that you have to face that ugliness constantly. But being with you, loving you, that does not bother me at all. That is the best thing I have ever done." She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "When this contract ends, when winter comes, what happens to us? What do you want to happen? I want you to stay." The words came quickly, as though she had been holding them back. Not as a hired guard, but as a partner, in business and in life. "I want to build something with you that lasts beyond a season of work." Devin's heart expanded in his chest, filling with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Then I will stay, for as long as you will have me." "What about forever? Is forever long enough?" He laughed and pulled her close, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "Forever sounds perfect." They made love for the first time that night, under stars and sky, learning the geography of each other's bodies with patient tenderness. Renna was strong and beautiful and utterly herself, and when she whispered his name in the darkness, it sounded like a prayer and a promise all at once. Autumn deepened as they continued their circuit through the borderlands. They visited the last settlements on Renna's list, completed her trading agreements, and began the journey back toward more settled territories where they would winter. The work was done, the contract technically fulfilled, but Devin showed no sign of leaving and Renna showed no sign of wanting him to go. One evening, as they camped in a meadow brilliant with late wildflowers, Renna pulled a small wooden box from her saddlebag and set it on the ground between them. "I have something to ask you," she said, and there was a nervousness in her voice that Devin had rarely heard. "It is probably too soon, and maybe I am being presumptuous, but I have been thinking about this for weeks, and I cannot wait any longer." Devin set down the rabbit he had been preparing for dinner and gave her his full attention. "I am listening." Renna took a breath, gathering courage, and met his eyes. "You were hired to guard my body, to keep me safe from external threats. You have done that perfectly, better than I could have hoped. But along the way, without me planning it or expecting it, you also began guarding something else. My heart, my trust, the parts of me I keep hidden from the world because showing them feels too dangerous." She opened the box, revealing 2 rings, simple silver bands etched with intricate patterns. Devin recognized orc craftsmanship, the kind of work that meant something deeper than mere decoration. In my culture, when someone proves themselves worthy of trust, when they show through action and time that they will stand beside you through anything, we ask them to make it permanent, Renna continued. These rings are a bonding promise. Wearing them means we are choosing each other, committing to face whatever comes together. It is not quite the same as human marriage, but similar a public declaration that we belong to each other. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the box, and Devin saw the vulnerability in her face, the fear that he might say no or ask for more time or reveal that everything between them had been temporary after all. He took the box from her hands and lifted out the larger of the two rings. The silver was cool against his palm, the etched patterns flowing around the band in designs that suggested rivers and roads, journeys taken together. He slipped it onto his finger and felt the weight of it settle there, solid and right. "You are asking me to guard your heart for life," he said slowly, wanting to get the words exactly right. "To stand beside you not for a season or a year, but for as long as we both live. To be your partner in everything, facing the world together." Yes, the word was barely a whisper. Devin took the second ring from the box and reached for her hand. "Renna Northway, you are the strongest, bravest, most brilliant person I have ever known. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me believe in futures I never let myself imagine. I would be honored to guard your heart for life, and to trust you with mine in return." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. Then she was kissing him, fierce and joyful, and he wrapped his arms around her and held on tight, this woman who had somehow become his entire world. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, Renna touched her forehead to his in a gesture he had learned was significant in orc culture, a sign of deep respect and intimacy. "We are bonded now," she said. "In the eyes of my people and my gods, you are mine and I am yours." "Good," Devin said, "because I was not planning on letting you go anyway." They sat together in the meadow as the sun set, their fingers intertwined, their rings catching the fading light. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain in its details, but certain in its foundation. They would face it together, guarding each other's hearts and building a life that belonged to both of them. Winter came gently that year, a gradual cooling rather than a sudden freeze. Devin and Renna settled in a small house on the outskirts of Thornfield, the town where they had first begun working together. It was a practical choice central to the border territories, where Renna conducted most of her trading, large enough to have amenities they needed, small enough that an orc woman and her human partner were merely unusual rather than scandalous. The house was modest but comfortable, with a good hearth and a stable for their horses, and a workshop where Renna could manage her accounts and correspondence. Devin found work training younger fighters at Marcus's yard, teaching the lessons he had learned through hard experience, and enjoyed having something to do beyond standing watch. But his real work, his true calling now, was being Renna's partner in every sense. They settled into domestic rhythms that felt both mundane and miraculous. Shopping for supplies in the market, Renna haggling with vendors while Devin carried packages. Cooking dinner together, learning to combine human and orc recipes into fusion meals that were sometimes successful and sometimes disasters that left them laughing. Long evenings by the fire, reading or talking or simply sitting in comfortable silence. The prejudice did not disappear. Some shopkeepers refused to serve them. Some neighbors gave them cold looks, and occasionally someone said something ugly enough that Devin had to bite back his first response, and remember that Renna faced this constantly with grace. But there were good moments too, Hilda the innkeeper welcoming them warmly, Marcus treating Renna with respectful friendship. The wool merchant who had been her first contact in Thornfield inviting them to his daughter's wedding. Spring came, and with it a new trading season. Renna began planning her routes and contacts, but now the planning included discussions with Devin about which territories to visit, which agreements to prioritize, how to build their business together. He had a good head for strategy, it turned out, and she valued his input on safety and logistics. "We should hire more guards," Devin said one evening as they studied maps and marked potential routes. "If we are going to expand the business, we need people we can trust to protect other traders or escort valuable shipments." Renna looked up from her notes, considering. That would mean training them, vetting them carefully. Most mercenaries would not work for an orc, even with good pay. Then we find the ones who care more about competence than color. They exist, I am proof of that. And if we build a reputation for fair treatment and reliable pay, we can attract people who value those things. She smiled, the expression soft and warm. "Look at you, thinking like a business owner. What happened to the simple mercenary I hired?" "You happened," Devin said, and leaned across the table to kiss her. "You made me want to build something that lasts." They spent that spring and summer expanding carefully, hiring 3 guards who passed Devin's rigorous testing and Renna's careful interviews. 2 were humans like Devin, ex-soldiers looking for steadier work, and 1 was a half-orc woman named Kara who had been rejected by both her human and orc communities, and found acceptance in their growing enterprise. Together they escorted caravans, protected traders, and helped Renna expand her network of contacts across the borderlands. The business grew. They hired clerks to manage increasing paperwork, rented warehouse space to store goods awaiting shipment, and established a reputation for honest dealing and reliable service. Merchants began seeking them out rather than the other way around, and Renna's name became known throughout the border territories as someone you could trust. Through it all, Devin watched her flourish. She had always been competent and skilled, but now with true partnership and security, she bloomed into something magnificent, confident, creative, building systems and connections that helped entire communities thrive. She was changing the borderlands in small but meaningful ways, proving through action that orcs and humans could work together for mutual benefit. And she changed him too. Devin found purpose beyond survival, beyond the next contract or the next fight. He learned to think in years instead of seasons, to plan for futures that extended beyond himself. He learned that protecting someone did not always mean standing between them and danger with a drawn sword sometimes. It meant listening when they needed to talk, believing in them when they doubted themselves, being the steady presence they could rely on when the world felt uncertain. On a warm evening in late summer, they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the rooftops of Thornfield. Renna had her head on Devin's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them tired from a long day but content in the bone-deep way that came from good work and good company. "Do you remember what you said when I first hired you?" Renna asked. "That you fight for coin, not politics, and everything else is noise." "I remember. Seems like a lifetime ago." "You were wrong, you know, or maybe you were right then, but you are different now." She lifted her head to look at him, her dark eyes serious. "You fight for things that matter, for people you love, for a future you want to build. The coin is just a practical detail." Devin thought about that, about the man he had been and the man he had become. "You are right. You changed me, Renna, made me better than I was." "We changed each other," she corrected gently. "I spent so long being careful, protecting myself, building walls to keep from getting hurt. You taught me it was safe to be open, to trust, to let someone truly know me. That is a gift beyond price." "So what do we do now?" Devin asked. "We have built a business, made a home, found each other. What comes next?" Renna was quiet for a moment, and he felt more than saw her smile. "I have been thinking about that, about legacy, about what we leave behind when we are gone. The business will continue, we have good people to run it, but I want something more personal, something that is just ours." "What do you mean?" She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, and Devin's breath caught as understanding dawned. "You are certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "As certain as I can be. Early yet, but yes. We are going to have a child." Joy flooded through him, bright and overwhelming. He pulled her close and buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her, feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. They were going to be parents. They were going to bring new life into this complicated, difficult, beautiful world. "I am terrified," Renna admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. "There is so much that could go wrong, so much we do not know about raising a half-orc child. What if they face worse prejudice than either of us? What if we cannot protect them from the ugliness?" "We will face it together," Devin said firmly. "Just like we face everything else. And we will teach them to be strong, to be kind, to know their worth regardless of what anyone else says. They will have everything we can give them: love, support, opportunity. The rest we will handle as it comes." Renna pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining with tears that he knew were happiness and fear and hope all mixed together. "You are going to be an amazing father." "We are going to be amazing parents," he corrected and kissed her forehead. "Both of us, together." The pregnancy progressed through autumn and into winter. Renna continued working as long as she could, managing the business from their home when travel became impractical. And Devin hovered like an anxious hen until she laughed and told him she was growing a baby, not made of glass. Their friends rallied around them, Marcus bringing supplies, Hilda offering advice from her own experiences with motherhood, the guards they had hired promising to keep the business running smoothly. In the depths of winter, on a night when snow fell softly outside and the house was warm with firelight, Renna gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, and there were hours when Devin feared he might lose her or the child or both. But she was strong, stubborn, refusing to surrender, and when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Renna looked up at Devin with a smile of such transcendent joy that he felt his heart might burst. "A boy," she said softly. "Our son." Devin looked down at the tiny creature in her arms, green-skinned like his mother, with small tusks already visible and pointed ears, but with human features blended into the mix. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, and when the baby's eyes opened briefly to reveal a curious dark gaze, Devin felt love slam into him with physical force. "Fenric," Renna said, testing the name they had chosen together. "Renna Northway, our firstborn son." "Hello, Fenric," Devin whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby gripped it with surprising strength, and Devin felt something fundamental shift inside him. He was a father now, responsible for this small life, and he would protect this child with everything he had. The early months were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Fenric was a healthy baby but demanding, wanting constant attention and care. Devin and Renna took turns with night feedings and diaper changes, stumbling through new parent exhaustion while simultaneously marveling at every small development. First smile, first laugh, first tooth, each milestone felt miraculous. Spring came again, and the business resumed its busy season. They hired additional help so that one of them could always be home with Fenric, refusing to sacrifice time with their son even as the trading operation continued to grow. It was challenging, juggling work and parenthood, but they made it function through careful planning and mutual support. Fenric grew into a bright, curious toddler, his personality a blend of Renna's determination and Devin's steady calm. He had his mother's green skin and tusks, his father's build and facial structure, and a smile that could charm anyone. When they took him to the market or walked through town, reactions were mixed. Some people stared or whispered, but others smiled at the happy family, and a few even stopped to admire the child. "He is going to face challenges," Renna said one evening, watching Fenric play with wooden blocks by the fire. "Being half human and half orc, fitting fully into neither world. Then we make sure he knows he does not have to fit into someone else's categories," Devin said. "He is himself, unique and valuable exactly as he is. That is the only identity that matters." 2 years after Fenric's birth, Renna became pregnant again. This time the process felt less terrifying, though no less miraculous. They welcomed a second son they named Barrett, who had more human features than his older brother, but still bore the green tint to his skin and small tusks that marked his mixed heritage. The house grew louder, more chaotic, filled with the sounds of children playing and arguing and laughing. Devin built additions to give everyone more space, and Renna organized their lives with the same skill she applied to business, creating routines that mostly worked and accepting gracefully when they occasionally fell apart. Years passed in a blur of busy contentment. The business continued to thrive, now employing dozens of people and facilitating trade across huge sections of the borderlands. Devin trained their guards personally, ensuring each one understood that they protected not just goods, but the principles their company stood for: fair dealing, honest work, respect for all people regardless of race. Renna became a recognized authority on border trade, consulted by merchants and settlement leaders alike. Their family grew again with the birth of a daughter they named Marissa, who had her mother's fierce spirit even as an infant. The 3 children filled their lives with joy and chaos, each one unique, each one loved beyond measure. On a summer evening when Fenric was 8, Barrett 6, and Marissa 3, the whole family sat on their expanded porch watching fireflies dance in the garden. The children were tired from a day of play, leaning against their parents in that boneless way of sleepy kids, and Devin felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "Are you happy?" Renna asked softly, her head on his shoulder while Marissa dozed in her lap. Devin thought about the question seriously, looking back at the journey that had brought them here. A simple guard contract that had changed everything. A woman who had hired him to protect her body and ended up giving him her heart. A life built from careful choices and brave risks, filled with love and purpose, and the kind of everyday magic that came from truly belonging somewhere. "I am happier than I ever imagined I could be," he said honestly. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed." "We gave each other that," Renna said. "Partnership, trust, love, a family, a future." Fenric stirred against Devin's side. "Papa, tell us again how you and Mama met." It was a favorite story, one they requested often, and Devin smiled as he began the familiar tale. "I was a mercenary looking for work, and your mother needed a guard for a dangerous journey through the borderlands. She tested me with a sword before she even told me her name." He told the story while the fireflies danced, and his children listened with wide eyes, even though they had heard it 100 times before. He told them about the bandits on the road, about learning to see past differences to the person underneath, about falling in love despite all the practical reasons not to. He told them about the meadow where their mother asked him to guard her heart for life, about the rings they still wore, about choosing each other every day through challenges and joy, and the simple moments that made up a life together. When he finished, Marissa was fully asleep and the boys were yawning. They carried the children inside and tucked them into beds, then returned to the porch to sit in comfortable silence. "You think they understand?" Renna asked. "That they are the product of something rare and precious? That their existence itself is proof that different peoples can love each other and build futures together?" "They will understand in time," Devin said. "For now, they just know they are loved. That is enough. You are right." Renna laced her fingers with his, their bonding rings catching the moonlight. "You are always right about the important things." "Not always, but I was right about you." He kissed her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "Taking that contract was the smartest thing I ever did." "I am glad you think so. Because I have been considering expanding into the Western territories, and we would need to spend several months traveling to establish those connections. Think you can guard me through another adventure?" Devin laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Renna, I will guard you through every adventure for as long as we both live. That is the promise I made, and I have never broken a promise to you." "I know." Her voice was soft with affection and absolute trust. "That is why I asked you to guard my heart for life. Because I knew even then that you were someone who would keep his word no matter what it cost. You are the best decision I ever made, Devin Northwood." "Northway," he corrected gently. "I am Devin Northway now, remember. Took your name when we bonded because I wanted everyone to know I belonged with you. My mistake." She was smiling. He could hear it in her voice. "Devin Northway, my partner, my love, my heart's guardian. What would I do without you? You will never have to find out." They sat together as the night deepened around them. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful from their unlikely connection. The business they had created would continue to grow, bringing opportunity and fairness to communities across the borderlands. Their children would grow up knowing they were loved and valued, would carry forward the lessons of acceptance and courage their parents had taught. And the love between an orc woman and a human man would endure, steady and strong, a quiet revolution in a world that too often let fear divide what should be united. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. In the town around them, people rested after honest days of work. Across the borderlands, in settlements and farms and trading posts, the networks of commerce and connection that Renna had built continued to function, making lives better in small but meaningful ways. And on a porch under stars, a woman and a man sat hand in hand, their bonding rings gleaming, their hearts full, their future bright with possibility. The guard who had been hired to protect a body had found something infinitely more valuable, a love worth guarding with everything he was, for all the days they had together. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.